Welcome everyone to today's devotion. We're in Revelation chapter 9, and again the imagery is quite striking and can be difficult to interpret. Really, the whole chapter can be quite difficult to interpret. I want us to notice that yesterday in Revelation chapter 8, we looked at the first four trumpets. Remember, you have seven seals. The seventh seal opens the seven trumpets. The seventh trumpet opens up the seven bowls. So you have 21 judgments, and they seem to have some parallels where they reflect each other. We talked about how the seven trumpets parallel the seven bowls, and even how the trumpets and the seals are related. So you can read Revelation in chronological order, that when one thing happens, the next thing, and all the way through. Or you can see it somewhat cyclical, that there seems to be overlap, which is really where I lean. The more I read Revelation, the more I lean in that direction. But you'll notice yesterday, the first four trumpets, which has some connection to the first four seal judgments, the horsemen, is that they were calamities in nature. So the sea, the earth, the sun, all of that was under assault. But in trumpets 5 and 6, it's a supernatural judgments. Okay, so the sun will go dark, I think, is the fourth trumpet, or the earth will dry up and all that sort of stuff. But here it's much more supernatural. It's very supernatural, and so we have this contrast of God's judgment through both nature and the demonic forces, but it's still God's judgment. But the main thing I want us to see in this chapter is not what these demonic beings do, as intriguing as that is. In fact, I've always loved the beginning of chapter 9. So just out there, scorpion stinging locust, right? I mean, just how cool is that? But what is important in this text is not what they do, but rather what they are not allowed to do. This is to say that this is a chapter that is a warning to the reader to repent in light of God's judgment. But we also need to see here that God is the one restraining forces of evil, whether it be human evil with wars we'll see, or with supernatural evil with the evil of fallen beings. So we see God's sovereign care over everything. And so when we have peace, when we have treaties, when we have diplomacy, we need to see that as God's grace to humanity. But when that is pulled back and man is handed over to his own base desires, all of that goes away and mankind becomes very violent and deadly. So we get the fifth angel blew his trumpets, the same language we saw in chapter 8 with the first four trumpets. A star falls from heaven, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. I don't want to spend forever on this because there's a lot of other details to looking at. There is a text in the Bible, it's actually in the Gospels, where Satan is described as a star falling from heaven. We need to see that the heavens and heaven are somewhat related in Second Temple Judaism. They're separate but still related. So what you have is a star, which is often used to describe divine beings, falling from heaven, falling from the heavens, and coming to the earth. Well, this is likely a depiction of the fall of who we call Satan, but nevertheless falls, and he's given a key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. And there's a lot of debate as to what is the bottomless pit, why is it there, why are there beings in the bottomless pit, and a lot of that is probably related to really developed by the book of Enoch and the Watchers and its interpretation of Genesis 6 with the sons of God, the Nephilim, and all that sort of stuff. Jude and to Peter hint at this interpretation. But the main thing we need to see is what comes out of that. We see in verse 3, are locusts on the earth. They were given a power like the power of scorpions of the earth. And what they do is they don't harm. Locusts would harm plants and grass and all that. They don't do that, but rather they harm those who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads, and they do so for a period of 5 months. So a couple of things to notice here. When we see locusts as an as a image of judgment. Now again, you can be a dispensationalist here and read it literally. So I read Left Behind when I was in high school. I grew up dispensationalist, and I remember that when this scene came, and it was one of my favorite scenes of the series because I find this stuff fascinating. I think it was Buck takes a magnifying glass. He traps one of these, and he looks at it and he describes it the same way this is. Well, I don't think we should literally be looking for locusts that sting like scorpions, that have the hair of women and the face of a man, and I don't think that's the point of the text. Remember, this is apocalyptic literature, where not everything is literal. It is figurative, it is metaphorical, it's symbolic, it's typographical, it's pointed us back to the Old Testament. But actually what we see is that locusts are often associated with judgment. Remember that the trumpet judgments parallel the Exodus judgments. Now there's 10 in Exodus in Egypt, and there's 7 here. But there was a locust plague in the Exodus story, much as there was darkness and the rivers turned into blood and all that sort of stuff. So there is that act of judgment. Of course, that was literal locusts. But really, the key passage for understanding the beginning of beginning of Revelation 9 is the prophecy of Joel. I preached through Joel a few years ago. It was a fascinating book. But there is a locust army that comes, and it really dominates the prophecy. And there's a lot of debate. Is this a literal locust plague? Is it a symbolic for a plague of army, an army coming? It's probably a little bit of both. They are related. But nevertheless, we see the same imagery here. They come and they don't attack the grass as a regular locust is, which probably means these aren't literal locusts. But rather they come to torment humanity, particularly unbelievers, those who don't have the seal of God on their forehead. And it's for a period of 5 months. Should it be a literal 5 months? Maybe, I don't know. But it's probably more symbolic to symbolize a short period of time. They will long for death, but death will not be brought to them. This is a type of hell, if you will, and that death will not be granted. Now, their appearance is described starting in verse 7 and going down. But what we need to see is that they were like horses prepared for a battle. This is warfare imagery, and Joel uses some of the same imagery here for the locusts there that is used here. And so we see they have heads with crowns of gold, faces like human faces, hair like women's hair, teeth like lion's teeth, breastplates of iron. Noise of their wings was like many chariots of horses rushing in the battle. What we need to see here is first of all, this is battle imagery. So this is a war that's going on here, a supernatural war. And so you have demonic forces infecting humanity, and what comes out of that is destruction, pain, agony. And so a lot of commentators will say that what you have here is not just physical harm, so the stinging of the scorpion tail, but also spiritual, mental, emotional harm as well. They desire something, but it isn't granted to them. So you have an unfolding of chaos driven by unbelief. And I will say, as a pastor, what you'll find is the more entrenched one comes into their unbelief, often the darker their life gets, the more complicated their life gets, the more ugly their life gets, the more painful life gets. And perhaps you have something in a more fantastic way being described here. So what you have is spiritual forces being unleashed at a greater level. This, of course, contrasts what Jesus comes and does. Jesus comes and he attacks not just the natural world, sickness, death, and all that, but the supernatural world, because he is king over all of it. I will get a spam call around this time every day. I am convinced of it. Verse 11, you'll see this is they have a king over them. It's interesting. Proverbs says locusts have no kings. So I think there's a play with that. The angel of the bottomless pit. Remember that you have a star, which is sometimes used as an image of divine beings, angelic beings, coming down to the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek it is Apollyon. Now, why did he provide both Hebrew and Greek? I don't know. No one knows. That's not unusual in the New Testament. Often the gospel writers will translate for us. Cephas means Peter, or means rock. There's all kinds of that. It'll quote Jesus in the Aramaic, Eli, Eli, loma sabachthani, but then give it, the Greek translation. But anyways, he does that. Now, we use apollyon more in English than the Greek, more than the Hebrew. But you can see this as a separate angel or as another title for Satan. It is striking that the Bible doesn't really give us a name of the chief of demons. Satan is not a proper noun. It's really an adjective, sometimes used as a noun. So we can think of the Satan, the deceiver, is what's going on there. But what we see here is these are more titles likely for Satan. In fact, perhaps he gives us Apollyon because it could be a pun here. Apollyon is similar to the word Apollo, and it's striking that the Greek god Apollo, his symbol was that of a locust. And we should note that both Nero and another one, Domitian, I think is his name, they were often associated with Apollo. So some will come and say here that yes, there is a supernatural battle going on here, an assault from demonic forces, but we can see it in the context of human affairs. I don't know if we can go that far or not, but it certainly is consistent with what we see in with the letters to the churches, in that they were under assault from the Roman system, and so there do seem to be hints at this throughout the book of Revelation, and perhaps this is one of them. That what you have is an assault upon humanity that is demonic in nature, but is at times demonstrates itself through a political system. Then we get a sixth angel here, blows his trumpet, and a voice says, "Release the four angels who are bound at the great rivers Euphrates." I think we should be careful reading too much into who these angels are and what that means. Are they good? Are they bad? Four angels show up earlier, so I'm not sure that's worth our discussion. The great rivers Euphrates is significant. We should note that it was sort of a boundary between Israel and ancient Babylon. Ancient Babylon's on the east of it. Israel at its broadest under Solomon reached the Euphrates River. And the hope of the Messianic kingdom is it would reach beyond the Euphrates to reach the ends of the earth. So there's some symbolism here. What you have is forces of evil mounting an attack. So the four angels, verse 15, who have been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, the year, were released to kill a third of mankind. So we move from desiring death, but death won't come, to not wanting death, but they die anyways. So you can do with that whatever you want. Verse 18, I just want to move forward. By these three plagues, and it lists them there, fire, smoke, and sulfur. A third of mankind was killed by the fire, smoke, and sulfur coming out of their mouths. For the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails. For their tails are like serpents with heads, and by means of them they wound. I think most commentators see this as either like spiritual warfare or actual warfare. So you have a pulling back of God's restraint. He's still sovereign over everything. And so he's limited things, 5 months. And then earlier we saw the hour, the day, the month, and the year. So this is all part of God's sovereign divine plan of judgment upon injustice and evil and sin on the earth. But it isn't all consuming. So just as with the first four trumpets, only a third, so God is restraining the effect, so he's doing the same here. But the real point starts in verse 20. The rest of mankind who are not killed by these plagues, all 6 of these trumpets, did not repent of the works of their hands, nor give up worshiping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, which cannot see or hear or walk. Striking here. He equates the worshiping of demons with idolatry. That's consistent with New Testament theology and really biblical theology. But it's striking, he mentions the worshiping of demons in a chapter dominated with demonic forces waging war against humanity. So in John's view, it is these demons that we lift up that are at the same time our demise. We invest in the things that harm us, that seek to destroy us, that separate us. Why do we do that? And so the calling of God is to say, herein is peace, herein is love and joy and reconciliation. Here is contentment. Here is all that you long for. If you would but surrender that, crucify false worship and false idols in favor of the true and living sovereign God. But the problem is that humanity has hard hearts and refuses to repent. It says it there, nor did they repent of their murders, sorceries, or sexual immorality or thefts. Notice again, you have false worship leads to evil. And so maybe we can read this chapter isn't just that demons are poking people with sticks, and they're just having fun with it in their tight red suits and their strange tail and their pointy heads. That shouldn't be the image we get here. But perhaps we should see that we are engaged right now in a spiritual war that too often, even we as Christians in 21st century America, are trying to fight armed with physical means. We think politics will save us. We think that a system will save us. We think psychology and Gnosticism will save us. But John is saying, look, there is a war that's being waged. At times it'll be worse than others. All of that under God's sovereign control. And the answer is repent. How often in those letters did John say, remember and repent? And so he says the same thing here. Will we not repent and thus be saved? I hope we will, especially after a year of suffering and of plague. Hope to see you guys here tomorrow.